Hello, control friends. Welcome back to another video in our MATLAB for Beginners course. Today, we're going to learn something very basic, but very important in our MATLAB software. First of all, if you haven't watched all the videos in our MATLAB for Beginners course, here's the link to the playlist so you can watch it from the beginning. My name is Sergio Castano, and in today's video, we're going to learn how to use MATLAB's help feature. The MATLAB help feature is one of the most important tools we have in our software. The MathWorks team has worked hard on this help documentation, which is really useful for us to learn about all the functions that the software itself offers. So you know that everything we're going to cover in this video can be found at controlautomaticoducasign.com, and I'll leave the link in the description of this video. So let's see how to use the help feature in MATLAB. If you want, you can speed up the video to make the explanation much faster or more dynamic. Hello, fellow control enthusiasts. So, we're now inside our MATLAB environment. Now, let's see how to use the help command. The help command is very important in this software because it lets us see how all the functions in MATLAB work. We already saw in the previous video that we could create vectors, for example, completely filled with zeros using the zeros function, and that inside the parentheses we would specify the dimensions of the matrix. So it was a 3 by 3 matrix, all filled with zeros. We can use the help function to find out what parameters we can enter into this function. Simply, to enter the help function, here within MATLAB, we are going to type help, which is help in English. We add a space, and then type the name of the function we want help with. In this case, I want help with the zeros function, and then I press enter. Now, all the help information for the zeros function has just been displayed. So it tells us that with zeros, if I type it like this, zeros, and then a capital N, it will create an n by n matrix, all filled with zeros. It tells me that if I type it with this syntax, m comma n, or just m, right? It will create a matrix filled with zeros of size m by n. And it also shows me that I can use other types of syntax as well. For example, this one here or this one here, which is the same, tells me that it's a matrix of n by p by, and so on. So this here is to create a vector, an array of zeros. And you can already start reading how to use this function by calling its different input parameters. Finally, MATLAB will give us some recommendations. If we're looking at the help for zeros, it tells us that we might also be interested in how the I function works, which we've already seen is used to create the identity matrix, or the ones function, which is used to create matrices filled entirely with ones. Let's suppose, I want to know how. I'm interested in the identity matrix. I click here and automatically the help for the I function opens up, which is the identity matrix. And again, it shows me the different syntaxes. It tells me that I can enter it like this to create an n by n identity matrix, or like this for an m by n identity matrix, and so on. We can see that there are several ways to create this identity matrix using the I function. For example, let's type help. We had seen another function called linspace, which is used to create linearly spaced vectors. We press enter, and we see that the help window pops up. It shows us a linearly spaced vector and explains how we should enter it with x1, x2. It generates a row vector with 100 linearly spaced positions between the points x1 and x2. So we see that in the previous example, we had done it with this structure here, where we already defined how many numbers it was going to create inside the vector. And again, it shows us recommendations in case we're also interested in knowing what linspace or the colon operator are used for. Additionally, this is the abbreviated help. If we want to expand the help, we can go here where it's set as the help command. We'll see that in just a moment. Or right here, we can tell it to show us the reference page for linspace, which will display all the complete information about linspace. So here, the MATLAB documentation opens up. It tells us that the linspace function generates a linearly spaced vector, and it shows us the syntax, how we should write it. It shows us the description. Here, everything is much cleaner and more organized. MATLAB's help even shows us examples. Here we see several examples. So here we see an example. Here it tells us that to create a uniformly spaced vector, the example says it's going to create a vector of 100, uniformly spaced in the interval from -5 to 5. So it says that we would simply enter the example like this, linspace from -5 to 5, and that way it would create the vector. I can even copy this here and paste it into MATLAB without the semicolon. And here we see, the 100 values uniformly spaced between -5 and 5. So we see that each function will have its own examples. Here it explains in detail what the input arguments are. And again, at the end, it shows us recommendations for other functions we might want to check out. So here we are in the MATLAB documentation, which we already saw we could access through help. Let's look here at reference, but we can also do it here in the Home tab, right where it says help. You just click on documentation or press F1, and all the software documentation will open up for us. Here we can find information about all the toolboxes that MATLAB has. Let's suppose, for example, that I want to know about the functions that are included in MATLAB. It even shows me courses here, like how to get started with MATLAB from scratch, which also teaches you to learn the basics of MATLAB. In this case, all the options are right here or in this menu. Let's suppose I want to know about mathematical functions. I click here on mathematics. Here it shows me several mathematical options that MATLAB has. I'm going to select elementary mathematics. I click here and it keeps opening up, showing me options like arithmetic, trigonometry, exponents, logarithms, numbers, complex numbers. Let's say I don't know trigonometry. So here I get all the trigonometric functions, sines, cosines, tangents. So there are several functions, and let's suppose I'm interested in tangents. We see that there are several types of tangent functions to calculate the tangent exactly. Here we see a brief description. For example, addend calculates the inverse tangent in radians, and addend, which ends with a d, calculates the inverse tangent but in degrees. Let's suppose I want addend. I click there, and again, we see here that the syntax window opened. It then shows me how I should call the inverse tangent in degrees, which is what it's doing here. Inverse tangent in degrees of x. The description tells me what that function does. Again, we can see examples like how to create, for example, the inverse tangent of a vector. So, we see that here in x, they created a vector with these numbers and simply calculated the inverse tangent of each of those numbers. And here would be the result of that operation. You can again copy all this code and paste it right into MATLAB. So now you know that all the documentation is right here in MATLAB. MATLAB's help is going to be our best friend in this software. Whenever we don't know how a function works or we don't know what the input and output arguments are, the best thing to do is come here to the documentation or simply type help and the name of the function to find out how to use it. Alright friends, that's all for today's video. I hope you liked it and I hope you understood everything. Let me know in the comments what you think about these MATLAB courses, what you want us to cover in this course. Let me know if it was clear how to use the help feature. You'll see that as you progress with this MATLAB software, you'll end up using it a lot because it's actually a really great resource and we'll rely on it a lot. Subscribe to the channel, give it a like if you enjoyed it, give it a dislike if you didn't, and I'll see you in the next video. You can follow me on my social media, subscribe to my channel by clicking on my photo, and turning on the notification bell. And don't forget to watch the next video.